And so after you come up with your 12 ideas, I want you to pick one of them, then that's the thumbnail that you're gonna push for this next part where you actually go into Illustrator. So Unit 6, I talk about the elements of design, and then I talk about the principles of design. And I talk about them about them both because there's really two different things to consider. The elements are kind of the components that make up a design, like line, shape, color, form, texture. And the principles are the ideas that you bring to design when you start to actually go through the design stage and start to think about a harmonious design that works. I talk about balance, contrast, emphasis, pattern, rhythm, unity, variety, and direction. So what I want you to do for this assignment is after you come up with your base shapes and you pick one that you like and you want to use, I have a template, and now I want you to take that one idea and start to explore variations of it, thinking about the different principles of design. And I kind of have it laid out specifically. So I talk about symmetry, contrast of size, rhythm, balance with asymmetry, spacing, rhythm, a flowing rhythm, radio symmetry, pattern, and variety through layering. So let's say, for example, I like this very last one, the triangle with the signature that's on the top and the bottom. The signature is this longer rectangle. So that's when I would go into Illustrator. So here I have this template, and then in my layers, I want to work on the second layer. So I'll lock the first layer of the template. So let's say, starting off with symmetry, that's going to be the easiest idea to play with. So now I'm refining this with the sketch. And what I have is a triangle. And what I want you to do now too is I want you to identify the different parts with a color. So let's say the logotype is red and the signature is blue. So symmetry is easy. It's basically both sides are the same. When we get this asymmetry, you're starting to explore balance by making sure that there's similar proportions in terms of the amount of visual information on both sides. So you got to break away from symmetry now. So let's say with something like this, I have to think in terms of balancing it out differently, where I have the same information on both sides, but it's not reflected. Contrast, start to think about scale. Maybe the signature is small. Maybe even the wording for that, you have different sizes. Spacing, think about how you can change spacing. So maybe something is offset, but then again, you're thinking about balance. And the thing to think about too is trying to make it obvious, like contrast and size should really push the contrast and size. Now, the ones that are going to be more challenging here are radial symmetry, rhythm progressive, rhythm flowing, pattern, and variety layering. So radial symmetry is something that you can do. Let me make this small. So the idea is it's cyclical, going in a circle, but the way that you create that in Illustrator is you use your rotation tool. So R is the shortcut. You have something selected, you click once, and that is your axis point. And then you hit Option Shift, and you can drag that, and then you hit Command or Control D, and then you got your symmetry, your radial symmetry. So that's using your rotation tool. So when you start to deal with pattern, radial symmetry, and the different rhythms, you're going to have multiple logotypes because you're going to repeat that logotype multiple times. So with pattern, what you can do is you can, and this kind of works, let's say the triangle shape is a little bit less of an equilateral triangle. I think this is like an isosceles triangle. So with something like this, with pattern, what you can do in Illustrator is you can do a couple things. You can create some duplicates, change the scale, and then you select the objects that you want to turn into a pattern, and then you go to Object, Pattern, Make, hit OK, and it goes into this pattern options window that should appear. If you don't see it, go to Window and select Pattern Options. And then you have a couple options here. And the other thing too is it gets rid of all of your other artwork, so you're just focused on the pattern. So now what you can do is you can play with different types of patterns. You can offset it. You can play with these offsets. And then you can actually go into the pattern itself and change things. So you can adjust the pattern too. So what I want you to do for pattern is I want you to create a pattern of some sort. If you option drag something, you can make some duplicates. You can play with scale until you get something you like. And then once you're happy with it, you just you can give it a name. So let's say I call it pizza pattern. And then you click on the arrow here to get out of this isolation mode. And then the pattern's going to appear in your swatches. So if you go to Window, Swatches, there's that pattern. So if I draw a shape and I get rid of my original objects here, I can fill it with that pattern. And then figure out too how you include a signature in there somehow with this. Maybe the signature is there, but that's exploring pattern. Another way to do it is start with something, let's say. Go to Object, Pattern Make, hit OK. And then if you get rid of the thing inside and you only have this blue square, and you got to make sure that size tile to art and move tile with art is turned off, you can add shapes inside of that square. So let's say you want to play with the red rectangle shape, or I'm sorry, the red triangle, and the rectangle for the signature. So you can start to play with that repetition by just having the bounding box. This blue box is the bounding box, and you can start to develop a pattern somehow that way. But once you hit this arrow that gets it out, that leaves that mode, pattern is created. So there's the pattern inside of a circle. There you go. So the other thing you could do is go to Object, Clipping Mask, and Release. It will actually release the pattern back into its various shapes. So you can release the pattern and then adjust it in different ways if you want to. But that's how you create a pattern in Illustrator, is by just selecting your shapes, going to Object, Pattern, and hit Make. So with the different rhythms here, progressive is basically a rhythm that will kind of be constant. So if you're dealing with a progressive rhythms are predictable. So let's say I want to create something where I have signature, logo type, and then signature again. When this is set up, you're going to assume that with a progressive rhythm, the next thing after the rectangle would be another triangle. So here too, you can create a variation where you have a flow of some sort, where you have a predictable progression with the rhythm. With a flowing rhythm, you can actually start to think in terms of how shapes flow along a curve, let's say. So something that flows is going to be almost distorted in a way. So with a flowing rhythm, you can start to play with different distortion tools. So what I can do with this is I can take my objects and select all of them. And then under the scale tool is one tool right here that has, it's the width tools on top, but then you have these other distortion tools. And you can play with the warp tool, and you can start to pull and push to create some sort of flowing rhythm. Or the other thing you can do too, so you go to Window, you go to Brushes, and then you go in the Brushes window, you select New Brush, But what you can do is you can create this art brush and hit OK. And you can just go with the default. So we'll call this, pizza brush. And then what you can do with this is delete what you had to make the brush, then use your curvature tool, draw some sort of curve, and have no fill set for that. And then click on that brush you make, and now you can create this flow type pattern. So it's still predictable, but it's not linear. There's a little bit of variety to it. So that's a flowing pattern. So I'm using the brushes palette. You select some sort of rhythm that you're establishing that's already progressive. Go to the little hamburger menu and pick a new brush. And you want to create an art brush. And then it will appear here, and then you can apply that to a curve. And then the last thing is this idea with layering. So when you start to play with layering, you're just playing with overlapping the logotype and the signature in some way. So just exploring that. And then once you have this set up, think about these various options. And for your discussion, submit this. But think about the one now that will actually be your final logo that you'll explore. And then what we'll do is then finalize it in the second part of the assignment, where we create the final logo of what this is with the text representing the areas indicated with these longer rectangles for the signature and the triangle itself. So here you're going to take this, let's say you prefer this one. And this will be in the next unit, because what I want you to do after you decide on what that final composition is going to be is take this and then use this as your template. Got my layers here. On your first layer, you're going to have that set as a template. And lower the opacity of those shapes. And then really think about what the final outcome of this should be. So you might have to go in here and start to sketch a little bit more, but then you'll think about fonts you're using. But really try to design something that fits within what you have. So you're always thinking about what that end result's gonna become. So this was, and in this part, once you get to this part, like I don't necessarily like these fonts stretched out like that. Maybe I have to work out this a little bit more with this design. Maybe this doesn't really work in terms of the emphasis for what I want. So you're still going to have to really think about the layout of these thumbnails that you're doing. And then once you get into this design phase, here, this is where I'm going to think about the triangle and what is that going to be. So you might have to do a little bit more sketching to come up with something to finalize this. But that's, in this circumstance, this is obviously some sort of pizza slice of some sort. But here, I just want you to have the basic configuration of where things are going to go before you think about that final design. So I do have some other examples here that I'm going to show in some videos that I have to kind of put into the unit. These are the things I want you to think about as you're designing this based on your initial thumbnails. So it's all about coming up with ideas. So starting with sketches, 12 sketches, and then taking one of those ideas and to explore it even more in this stage where you're starting to think about different design principles. And really kind of think about the words, even though the letters aren't in there, you know, maybe this has to go down here, or think about, you know, changing the shape of things and rotating things as well. So maybe for, you know, spacing, you know, I rotate that in some way. So don't get stuck with one idea. Maybe symmetry is actually having this like this. Maybe for balance, you know, maybe this is actually on an angle. Same way with the signatures, you know, maybe those are on an angle too, but you still have to achieve some sense of balance with them. So kind of work these out. And these are the two parts of this. So it's due next week. So it's really, this is not the difficult part really, but it's really meant for you to explore and come up with these sketches, keep it simple, but explore different ways that you can rearrange the different elements for the logo. So when you get into the final design phase, you have an idea that's kind of well thought out already, and you have this history behind it that shows your design and thought process using these various principles. So things to remember too is how to create radial symmetry patterns and different types of flows. But everything else, you should already have the tools like the reflect tool to come up with these ideas.